I handed the judge a manila envelope during my divorce hearing. 30 seconds later, she looked at my husband and laughed. Not a polite smile, not a quiet chuckle. She actually laughed out loud. The entire courtroom froze. My husband's attorney stopped speaking mid-sentence. The woman sitting behind him, his new girlfriend, stared in disbelief. And my husband, Ryan Carter, the man who had spent the last 6 months telling everyone I was nothing more than a simple army officer who didn't belong in his world anymore, suddenly looked like he couldn't breathe. His face turned white, his hands gripped the edge of the table. The judge flipped another page, then another. Then she looked up again. "Mr. Carter," she said, still smiling. "In 22 years on this bench, I have never seen anyone walk into my courtroom this confidently while carrying evidence this damaging against himself." The room fell silent. Ryan swallowed hard. He had no idea what was inside that envelope. But I did, because for 7 years I had built his future, and that envelope contained every receipt, every sacrifice, every promise, every lie. The funny thing about betrayal is that it never starts with one big moment. It starts with 1,000 tiny ones. A missed phone call, a cold glance, a conversation that suddenly feels different. A person looking at you as if they have forgotten who you are. As I sat in that courtroom watching Ryan slowly realized something had gone terribly wrong, my mind drifted back through the years, back before the law degree, before the expensive suits, before the arrogance, back to when he still looked at me like I mattered. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a pale glow across the polished wooden tables. Everything felt sharp and cold. Ryan sat across from me in a navy designer suit. I remembered when he owned exactly one suit, a cheap charcoal gray one we bought from a discount store because it was all we could afford. Now he wore a watch worth more than my first deployment bonus. Funny how success changes some people. Or maybe it just reveals who they always were. His attorney stood beside him, speaking confidently. "Your Honor, my client earned everything he has through his own hard work and determination. Mr. Carter graduated near the top of his law school class and recently secured a prestigious position with one of the most respected firms in the state." The attorney paced slowly, practiced, smooth, confident. Mrs. Carter served in the military during the marriage. Certainly, however, she made no meaningful contribution to Mr. Carter's professional success and possesses no comparable earning capacity. My client is requesting an equitable dissolution of the marriage with a modest support arrangement. No meaningful contribution. The words settled into my chest like ice. For a moment, I stared at my folded hands. The same hands that had loaded cargo planes in freezing weather. The same hands that had signed deployment papers. The same hands that had mailed checks month after month after month while Ryan sat in lecture halls chasing his dream. No meaningful contribution. I almost laughed. Beside me sat my attorney, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had been my closest friend since high school. She knew everything. The deployments, the sacrifices, the nights I cried alone in military housing halfway across the world because I missed my husband. The years I spent believing I was helping build a future for both of us. Sarah squeezed my arm gently beneath the table. I knew what that meant. "Stay calm. Not yet," Ryan's attorney continued. "My client has generously offered to allow Mrs. Carter to retain her vehicle and personal possessions. He seeks nothing from her because there is essentially nothing of value to seek. Nothing of value." There it was again, the second slap. I looked across the room. Ryan wasn't correcting him. He wasn't objecting. He wasn't defending me. He sat there nodding, agreeing. The same man who once cried when I left for my first overseas deployment. The same man who used to tell me I was the strongest woman he had ever known. Now he looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a reminder of a life he wanted to forget. Behind him sat Vanessa Brooks, 29 years old corporate attorney. Perfect blonde hair, perfect smile, perfect life, at least from the outside. She shifted slightly in her chair and crossed her legs. Ryan had claimed she was only a colleague, then a friend, then a mentor. Then somehow, only weeks after filing for divorce, she became his girlfriend. Amazing how quickly those things happen. The attorney finally returned to his seat. Ryan leaned back confidently, certain he had already won. Sarah slowly stood. The room became quiet. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "before the court considers any proposed settlement, we would like to submit additional evidence." Judge Reynolds nodded. Proceed. Sarah looked at me. Just one glance. That was our signal. The moment we had spent weeks preparing for. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I bent down and picked up the manila envelope resting beside my chair. It felt surprisingly heavy. Not because of the paper, because of what it represented. 7 years. 7 years of believing in someone. 7 years of choosing their dream over your own comfort. 7 years of trust. I stood. Every eye in the courtroom followed me. My shoes clicked softly against the floor as I walked toward the bench. Ryan frowned, confused. For the first time all morning, uncertainty appeared on his face. I reached the judge. She accepted the envelope with a professional nod. Then I turned and returned to my seat. The room was silent. Judge Reynolds opened the envelope. She removed the documents. The first page, the second, the third. At first, her expression remained neutral, professional, unreadable. Then, her eyebrows rose. She turned another page, looked up at Ryan, looked back down. Read further. A faint smile appeared. Then another page, and suddenly the smile widened. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. His attorney leaned forward. Vanessa stopped moving altogether. The judge reached the final document, read it carefully. Then she laughed. A real laugh, warm, unrestrained, completely unexpected. And that was the exact moment Ryan Carter realized the story he had been telling everyone about our marriage was about to collapse. The judge's laughter echoed through the courtroom for only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Long enough for Ryan's confidence to crack. Long enough for Vanessa Brooks to stop smiling. Long enough for me to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Judge Reynolds composed herself, dabbing lightly at the corner of one eye. Then she looked directly at Ryan. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice calm now. I believe we are missing some very important facts regarding this marriage. Ryan swallowed. His attorney stood quickly. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. The attorney sat back down immediately. I think she continued tapping the documents lightly. We should take a step back and discuss how Mr. Carter became a lawyer in the first place. A silence settled over the room. Sarah looked at me and gave a small nod. And suddenly, my mind traveled backward, 7 years back before the courtroom, back before the betrayal, back before success changed everything, back to when Ryan and I were simply two young people trying to build a future together. 7 years earlier, I was 25 years old and serving as a first lieutenant in the United States Army. Ryan was 24. We lived in a small apartment outside Fort Liberty. The place wasn't much. The carpet was worn, the kitchen cabinets creaked, the air conditioner rattled every summer. But we loved it because it was ours. Ryan worked part-time at a bookstore while studying for the LSAT. Every evening after duty, I would come home exhausted and find him sitting at our tiny dining table surrounded by law school prep books. His eyes would light up when I walked through the door. How was your day, Captain America? He would joke. I would laugh. Then he'd kiss my forehead. Simple moments. The kind you never realize are precious until they're gone. Ryan had wanted to become a lawyer since he was a teenager. He talked about it constantly. Not because he wanted money, at least not back then. He talked about helping people, fighting for justice, standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. I believed every word. Then the acceptance letter arrived. I still remember that day. I was in uniform when I walked into our apartment. Ryan stood frozen in the middle of the living room holding an envelope. His hands were shaking. For one terrifying second, I thought something terrible had happened. Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. I got in. I dropped my bag. What? I got in, Emma. His voice broke. Harper Law School accepted me. We both cried. We danced around that tiny apartment like idiots. For one perfect evening, life felt beautiful. Then reality arrived. Tuition, books, housing, transportation, fees, thousands and thousands of dollars. Far more money than either of us possessed. For weeks, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Student loans would cover part of it, not all of it. The gap remained enormous. One night, Ryan pushed away the paperwork and rubbed his face. I can't do it. I looked up. What? I can't afford this. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm going to decline. The room felt suddenly smaller. No, Emma. No. He stared at me. I reached across the table and took his hand. You've wanted this your whole life. We can't pay for it. We'll figure it out. He shook his head. No, we won't. But I already knew my answer. The Army was offering additional assignments, extended training rotations, overseas deployments, hazard pay, separation pay, assignments nobody wanted, dangerous assignments, long assignments. I volunteered for every single one. The first deployment lasted 9 months. The second lasted nearly a year. Then another and another. Each time I packed my duffel bag and left. Each time Ryan promised it would be worth it. The first few years were hard. Harder than anyone outside military life can truly understand. I spent holidays sleeping in temporary housing halfway around the world. Birthdays passed through video calls. Anniversaries were celebrated through unstable internet connections. Sometimes I watched Ryan blow out candles on a birthday cake through a laptop screen. Sometimes he watched me eat Thanksgiving dinner in a military dining facility. But every month I sent money home. Every single month. Tuition payments, housing payments, book expenses, exam fees, parking fees, everything. The checks became routine. The sacrifice became routine. And strangely enough, so did the loneliness. I learned how to sleep alone, how to celebrate alone, how to carry the weight of missing someone every day. Yet, I never complained because Ryan always sounded grateful at first. Whenever I came home on leave, he would wrap his arms around me and refuse to let go. I couldn't do this without you. He said it constantly over and over. I'll never forget what you're doing for me. One winter evening during his second year of law school, we sat together on the couch while snow fell outside. He rested his head against my shoulder. When I graduate, he said quietly, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I smiled. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. His voice was serious. Everything. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. By his third year, things were improving. He was near the top of his class, professors praised him. Internships opened doors. Prestigious firms began recruiting him. I felt proud. So proud. Every promotion he earned felt like a victory we shared. Every success felt like proof that the sacrifices mattered. What I didn't realize was that success was changing him. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. The first signs seemed harmless. He started talking about classmates from wealthy families, students who drove luxury cars, students whose parents were judges and partners at major firms. At first, he sounded impressed. Then he sounded envious. Then something else. One evening during a video call from Germany, he mentioned a networking dinner. You should have seen this place. I laughed. Fancy? You have no idea. He smiled, then added something strange. Everyone there was so polished. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? He shrugged. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Months later, I would understand exactly what he meant. Because somewhere along the way, Ryan Carter stopped looking at those people with admiration. He started wanting to become them. And people who desperately want a new world often begin by rejecting the one they came from. The change didn't happen overnight. That's what made it so dangerous. If Ryan had suddenly become cruel, I would have noticed. If he had woken up one morning and transformed into a stranger, I would have fought back. But people rarely change that way. Instead, they drift. One small step at a time, one compromise at a time, one forgotten promise at a time. And before you realize what's happening, the person standing in front of you looks familiar but feels completely different. The first time I noticed it, I had just returned from a 10-month deployment. I remember walking through the airport terminal with my duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. My uniform felt heavy. My body ADHD. I hadn't slept properly in almost 2 days, but none of that mattered because Ryan was waiting for me, or at least I thought he was. I spotted him near the baggage claim area. He looked good. Really good. Better than I remembered. The old bookstore employee was gone. The young law student was gone. Standing there was a confident man in a tailored jacket, expensive shoes, perfect haircut. For a moment, I felt proud. Then something strange happened. When he hugged me, it felt brief, polite, almost distracted. Not cold, not yet, just different. I ignored the feeling. People grow. People change. Long-distance marriages are complicated. That's what I told myself. During the drive home, Ryan talked almost non-stop. Not about us. Not about how much he missed me. not about our future. He talked about the law firm where he had landed an internship, the partners, the clients, the networking events, the connections, the opportunities. I listened and smiled because I genuinely wanted him to succeed. At one point, he glanced at my uniform. "You still wearing that style?" I laughed. "It's the army." "Ryan." "Yeah." He smiled, but something about the expression felt strange. Like he was evaluating me, not seeing me, evaluating me. The feeling stayed with me all night. A few weeks later, I attended one of his networking events. I wasn't excited about it. Crowded rooms had never been my thing. Give me a military briefing with 50 officers and I'd be perfectly comfortable. Put me in a ballroom full of corporate attorneys and I felt like I'd wandered into the wrong building. Still, Ryan wanted me there. Or at least he said he did. I spent nearly an hour getting ready. I wore the nicest dress I owned. Simple navy blue. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just elegant and clean. When I came out of the bedroom, Ryan looked up. For a second, I expected him to smile. Instead, he hesitated. "You look nice." Something about the pause bothered me. Nice. He quickly recovered. "I mean great." But I had already noticed it. The hesitation, the comparison happening behind his eyes. At the event, I met dozens of attorneys, partners, associates, executives, judges. Most were perfectly polite. A few were genuinely kind. Others looked at me with barely concealed curiosity. One woman asked where I worked. "The Army." Her smile froze slightly. "Oh." That was all she said. Just, "oh," but I understood exactly what it meant. Later that evening, I found Ryan speaking with a group of attorneys. A tall blonde woman stood beside him. Confident, beautiful, expensive, the kind of person who looked as though she belonged in magazine advertisements. Ryan introduced us. "Emma, this is Vanessa Brooks." Vanessa smiled warmly. "At least on the surface. I've heard so much about you." I smiled back. Hopefully good things. "Of course." But then she looked at Ryan. Not me. Ryan, and something passed between them. A look brief, almost invisible, the kind most people would miss. I didn't. Military training teaches you to notice things. Body language, eye contact, micro-expressions, small details. I felt a flicker of discomfort. Nothing more. Not yet. Over the next year, Ryan's career exploded. His internship became a full-time position. His salary doubled, then nearly doubled again. The law firm loved him. Clients loved him. Everyone seemed to love him. And the more successful he became, the less comfortable he seemed around me. The comment started subtly. "You should update your wardrobe. You should do something different with your hair. You don't have to wear military jackets everywhere." At first I laughed them off. Then they became more frequent, more pointed. One evening, I came home from training exercises exhausted and covered in dust. Ryan glanced up from his laptop. "You know, most women your age spend more time taking care of themselves." I stared at him. "What?" "I'm just saying." His eyes returned to the screen. "You've kind of stopped trying." The words hit harder than they should have, because I had spent 7 years trying. Trying for us, trying for him, trying to keep a marriage alive across continents and oceans. But somehow none of that counted. Months later, the criticism became routine. My clothes, my haircut, my hobbies, my friends, my career. Everything became a problem. One night, he invited me to a charity gala hosted by his firm. I arrived directly from a military event, still dressed professionally, still looking presentable. Ryan saw me and immediately frowned. "What?" I asked. He looked away. "Nothing." "Ryan?" He sighed. "You just stand out." I laughed. "That's usually what uniforms do." "No." His tone sharpened. "Not like that." The conversation ended there, but the damage remained because for the first time I realized something painful. Ryan wasn't proud that I served. He was embarrassed. The realization settled into my chest like a stone. Around that same time, Vanessa Brooks became a permanent presence in our lives. At first, it was harmless, or at least it sounded harmless. Vanessa helped with a case. Vanessa recommended a client. Vanessa organized the event. Vanessa said something hilarious today. Every conversation seemed to include her name. Every story, every dinner, every work event. Vanessa, Vanessa, Vanessa. One evening, I finally asked, "Do you realize how often you talk about her?" Ryan looked up sharply. His expression darkened immediately. Seriously? It was just a question, no. His voice grew colder. It wasn't. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means you're being insecure. The accusation caught me off guard. Insecure? You're always suspicious. I almost laughed. Always. This was the first time I'd ever mentioned it. But something inside me warned me not to argue, because I could feel the distance growing, and I was terrified of making it worse. The breaking point came 8 months later. I still remember every detail. The rain outside, the smell of coffee, the sound of traffic beyond our apartment windows. Ryan stood near the kitchen island holding a glass of whiskey. I stood across from him, and for the first time in 7 years, neither of us was pretending anymore. You're different, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. So are you. No. I shook my head slowly. I'm still the same person. He laughed a cold laugh. One I had never heard before. And then he finally said the words that destroyed everything. That's the problem, Emma. I felt my stomach tighten. He looked directly at me. The simplicity of your life exhausts me. Silence. I honestly thought I had misheard him. What? The army, the routines, the way you think, the way you live? His expression hardened. I've outgrown it. The room felt suddenly smaller. Ryan took another sip. Then he delivered the final blow. The truth is, you're not the woman I need anymore. I couldn't speak. You don't belong in the life I've built. My chest tightened. And then he said the words I would never forget. You aren't worthy of the future I want. The world seemed to stop. 7 years. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of deployments. 7 years of believing in him. Reduced to one sentence. Not worthy. 3 weeks later, Ryan Carter filed for divorce. And what neither of us knew at the time was that his biggest mistake wasn't leaving me. It was assuming I had nothing left to fight with. The worst part about heartbreak isn't the moment it happens. It's what comes after the silence, the empty spaces, the routines that no longer make sense. For weeks after Ryan left, I moved through life on autopilot. I went to work. I attended briefings. I completed training exercises. I smiled when people expected me to smile. Then I came home to an apartment that suddenly felt far too large. At night, I would sit in the dark living room and stare at the city lights outside the window. 7 years. 7 years of my life gone. Not because we failed. Not because we stopped loving each other together. Because one person decided success mattered more than loyalty. The divorce papers arrived 12 days after Ryan moved out. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. The settlement proposal was almost insulting. Ryan wanted nearly everything. Most of the assets, most of the investments, most of the savings. He offered me a small settlement payment that barely covered a fraction of what I had spent helping him through law school. The language hurt more than the numbers. No significant contribution, limited financial involvement, minimal impact on professional advancement. I read those phrases 3 times. Each time they felt worse. By the 4th page, I had stopped reading. I simply sat there staring at the paper. 7 years of deployments, 7 years of tuition payments, 7 years of sacrifice. And somehow, according to Ryan's attorney, I had contributed almost nothing. That night, Sarah came over. She found me sitting exactly where she had found me 3 hours earlier. The divorce papers still spread across the table. The untouched cup of coffee beside them completely cold. She quietly sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she picked up the documents, read several pages, then shook her head. They're lying. I looked at her. Sarah folded the papers carefully. No. Her voice was firm. Let me correct that. She leaned forward. They're counting on you not proving they're lying. Something about the way she said it caught my attention. For the first time in weeks, I looked directly at her. What do you mean? Sarah's eyes narrowed. I mean, Ryan's entire case depends on one assumption. What assumption? That you didn't keep records? I blinked. She continued. Tell me something. She folded her hands. When Ryan was in law school, how much money did you send him? I laughed bitterly. I have no idea. Try. I stared out the window. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Maybe more. Deployment pay, housing allowances, hazard pay, overseas bonuses. Most of it went to Ryan. Sarah nodded slowly. Good. I frowned. Good. Because somewhere there are records. That conversation changed everything. Over the next several weeks, Sarah became obsessed. There was no other word for it. Obsessed. Every evening after work, I would come home to find her sitting at my dining table surrounded by documents, bank statements, tax records, loan paperwork, financial disclosures, military pay summaries, stacks and stacks of paper. The dining room slowly transformed into a war room, and Sarah treated it exactly like a military operation. Methodical, precise, relentless. One night, she called me over. "Sit down." I dropped into a chair. "What did you find?" Sarah turned her laptop toward me. "Look." Rows of numbers filled the screen. Deposits, transfers, withdrawals, years of transactions. "Do you see this?" I stared. At first, it looked meaningless. Then the pattern emerged. Month after month, year after year. Transfers from my account to Ryan's. Thousands of dollars. Over and over again, Sarah pointed. Tuition, another line. Books, another housing, another exam fees. My stomach tightened. Seeing the numbers together was overwhelming. I had known I supported him. I just hadn't realized how much. Then Sarah found something even bigger. A week later, she burst into my apartment carrying an old storage box. Her face looked almost excited. "What?" I asked. She dropped the box onto the table. "Help me." We spent 2 hours sorting through old documents, receipts, tax returns, military orders, old photographs. Then suddenly Sarah froze. I watched her carefully pull a folder from the bottom of the box. Her eyes widened. "Emma." Something in her voice made my pulse jump. "What?" She slowly opened the folder. Inside was a document. Several documents, actually. A loan agreement. My loan agreement. 7 years earlier, during Ryan's second year of law school, a financial aid issue had nearly forced him to withdraw from school. I remembered the panic, the fear, the sleepless nights. Without thinking twice, I had taken out a personal loan, $48,000 in my name, my responsibility, my risk. I had forgotten about it. Sarah hadn't. She flipped through the pages, then stopped and smiled, a slow smile. The kind attorneys smile when they discover buried treasure. "Emma? What?" She handed me the final page. I stared, then stared again, my breath caught. At the bottom sat Ryan's signature, a notarized repayment agreement, a promissory note signed by Ryan Carter himself. I could barely speak. "Oh my God." Sarah laughed softly. "Exactly." The document clearly stated that the money had been used for his legal education and would be repaid once he entered professional practice. A legally enforceable promise, one Ryan had apparently forgotten existed. I sat back in my chair. My heart pounded. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt something changing. The balance, the narrative, the entire case. But Sarah wasn't finished. Not even close. A few days later, she obtained financial disclosures from Ryan's attorneys. And that's when everything truly exploded. I still remember the silence that filled the room as Sarah read the documents, then looked up at me, then looked back down. "You're not going to believe this." My stomach tightened. "What?" Sarah slid the papers across the table. I read them once, then again, then a third time because surely I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. 3 months before filing for divorce, Ryan had transferred $127,000 from marital accounts. The recipient, Vanessa Brooks. My chest tightened. "What is this?" Sarah pointed. The transfer description read, "Strategic investment." I laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. "Investment?" Sarah folded her arms. "That's what he's calling it." The room suddenly felt very quiet. We both knew what it really was. Ryan had secretly moved marital funds to the woman he was involved with. Without my knowledge, without my consent, without disclosure. The expression on Sarah's face hardened. He just handed us the case. That night, we sat together for hours, building timelines, organizing evidence, connecting transactions. Every document told the same story. Ryan hadn't built his success alone. He had built it standing on my shoulders. And then once he reached the top, he had tried to erase the person who carried him there. Finally, Sarah placed a large manila envelope on the table. The envelope, the one that would eventually reach Judge Reynolds. Inside sat everything. The loan documents, the repayment agreement, the bank records, the transfer records, years of evidence, Years of truth. Sarah slid the envelope toward me. "When the time comes," she said quietly, "you hand this directly to the judge." I looked down at it. The weight felt heavier than paper, heavier than documents. It felt like 7 years. And somewhere across the city, Ryan Carter was preparing for court, completely unaware that the very evidence he thought had disappeared forever was about to walk into the courtroom with me. I watched Judge Reynolds laugh, and for the first time in nearly a year, I felt the crushing weight on my chest begin to lift. Not because Ryan was suffering, not because I wanted revenge, because the truth was finally in the room, and the truth, unlike people, doesn't abandon you when it becomes inconvenient. The courtroom remained completely silent. Ryan's attorney looked like someone had pulled the floor out from underneath him. Vanessa sat frozen in the gallery. Ryan himself looked confused, then worried, then terrified. Judge Reynolds set the final document on the bench and folded her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, dangerously calm. "Mr. Carter, your attorney, informed this court that your wife made no meaningful contribution to your professional advancement." She lifted the promissory note. "Would you care to explain this document?" Ryan stared, his face drained of color. The judge waited. "I remember the loan." His voice sounded weak now, much weaker than it had an hour earlier. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You remember it?" "Yes." He shifted uncomfortably. "But it was years ago." The judge looked down at the document years ago. She glanced back up. "Mr. Carter, this is a legally binding repayment agreement, acknowledging that your wife personally financed a significant portion of your legal education." Ryan remained silent. The judge continued. "And according to these financial records, she also paid the majority of your living expenses throughout law school." Ryan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, while those contributions may have existed, they don't necessarily sit down." The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The attorney sat immediately. Judge Reynolds turned another page, then another, then another. Every page seemed to make her expression colder. She reviewed years of bank statements, transfer records, military pay reports, tuition payments, housing expenses, everything Sarah had spent weeks organizing. Finally, she looked directly at Ryan. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judge continued. "Your wife spent 7 years supporting your legal education." She glanced down. "She accepted overseas deployments." Another page. "She used military bonuses to pay your tuition." Another page. "She assumed personal debt on your behalf." Another page. "She postponed her own goals to help you achieve yours." The silence in the room became almost painful. Then Judge Reynolds reached the final section. The transfer records, the ones involving Vanessa. The atmosphere changed immediately. She lifted the paperwork. "Mr. Carter." Ryan visibly tensed. 3 months before filing for divorce, you transferred $127,000 from marital accounts to Miss Vanessa Brooks. Nobody breathed. Ryan swallowed. "It was an investment." The judge stared at him. "An investment." For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed again. A shorter laugh this time. Sharper, less amused, more astonished. "An investment." Ryan nodded weakly. "Yes." The judge looked toward Vanessa. Vanessa looked away. Then Judge Reynolds returned her attention to Ryan. "An investment made without your wife's knowledge." Silence, without disclosure. Silence, without consent. Silence. The judge slowly removed her glasses. In that moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Mr. Carter, this court has a different term for that." Ryan lowered his eyes. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "It's called dissipation of marital assets." Every word landed like a hammer. Ryan's attorney rubbed his forehead. Vanessa stared at the floor, and Ryan finally looked exactly like a man realizing he had lost. The judge closed the file. Then came the ruling. The moment everything changed. The moment 7 years finally mattered. Judge Reynolds adjusted several documents and began reading. First, the courtroom became perfectly silent. "Mrs. Carter is awarded full repayment of the educational loan, plus accrued interest." Ryan closed his eyes. The judge continued. "Second, the court finds overwhelming evidence that Mrs. Carter substantially contributed to Mr. Carter's professional advancement through direct financial support and significant personal sacrifice." I felt tears gathering in my eyes, not because of the money, Because someone finally saw it. Someone finally acknowledged it, Judge Reynolds continued. Third, all marital assets accumulated during the marriage shall be divided equally. Ryan's shoulders slumped. Fourth, the $127,000 transferred to Miss Brooks shall immediately be restored to the marital estate, and included in that division. Vanessa's face turned pale. For the first time all morning, she looked directly at Ryan. The expression on her face wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was anger. Pure anger. The judge wasn't finished. Fifth, Ryan looked physically ill. Mrs. Carter shall receive compensatory spousal support reflecting the professional opportunities she delayed while supporting her husband's legal education. The final figure left the courtroom stunned. The total settlement exceeded $600,000. Ryan looked like he had been punched. His attorney stopped taking notes. Vanessa stared straight ahead, and I simply sat there trying to process what had happened. 7 years. 7 years had not disappeared. 7 years had not been erased. They mattered. Judge Reynolds looked directly at Ryan one final time. Her voice softened slightly, but only slightly. Mr. Carter, success does not erase obligation. Ryan said nothing. Your wife believed in you before anyone else did. Silence. She invested in your future. Silence. And when that investment paid off, you attempted to convince this court she was worth almost nothing. The judge shook her head. That argument ends today. Then she struck the gavel. We are adjourned. The sound echoed through the courtroom. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt strangely warm, almost unreal. Sarah hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You did it. I laughed through tears. No. I shook my head. We did it. As we walked down the courthouse steps, raised voices caught my attention. Ryan and Vanessa were arguing. Not quietly, not politely. Arguing. Vanessa looked furious. She gestured sharply toward the courthouse, toward Ryan, toward the disaster he had created. Then she turned and walked away. Ryan called after her. She never looked back. I watched him standing alone. Expensive suit, expensive watch, prestigious career, everything he had spent years chasing. And yet, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not because he lost money, because he had finally lost control of the story. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I moved into a beautiful home near the military base. Not extravagant, not flashy, just peaceful. I completed a leadership program I had postponed for years. I accepted a promotion. I started planning for my future instead of financing someone else's. One Saturday morning, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee watching the sunrise. The air felt cool, fresh, free. My phone buzzed. An email confirming acceptance into a graduate business program. I smiled. 7 years ago, I had invested in someone else's dream. Now, I was finally investing in my own. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt enough. More than enough. It felt like freedom. If, Clear's Throat, this story touched you, take a moment and think about the people who stood beside you when nobody else did. Success means very little if we forget the hands that helped us reach it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, justice, and second chances, subscribe so you won't miss the next journey.